deeps of human reality. They are shadow dreams, and yet it is not even correct to call them shadows, for shadows actually image and presage the things that they are shadows of, and these two types of dream do not. Neither is it correct to say that they are mere privations, for what philosophers call privation is itself morally neutral. Privation is simply the non-being of the form that is implicit in the matter as not yet. It might be, but for now, not yet. But these shadows are not morally neutral, at least not as projects consciously proffered in the name of education. They are not tentative preliminary steps in a process of education on the way to ideal human form. They cannot be. The reason is that education today never seriously addresses the possibility of ideal humanity, though the language of such is used to sell as substantive, something that is in fact empty, a false coinage. In today's political environment, traditional ideals have come to be understood as the product of elitist, chauvinistic mythmakers. I'm sure if you talk to some people, they would place me right into that category. And obviously, in such an environment, ideals cannot be taken seriously, and they are not taken seriously. Thus, today's shadow dreams are what stand in for and in fact replace genuine dreams. They substitute for and therefore take part in the annihilation of the possibility of ideal humanity, the possibility of it coming into any concrete form. That is to say, they annihilate the possibility of ideals informing the life of this or that individual student. So I ask you, how could this be morally neutral? Cattle eat green hay and lie down in straw. Our students, however, lie down with sweet hay all around them and eat straw. But straw is not what we promised them. We know with the shrewdness of the Grand Inquisitor that if we did, they would never take the bait. They quite naturally seek something higher. It is natural for us. If you remember your childhood, you'll know how sensitive you were to this. And you weren't alone. Children naturally seek something higher. And yet, they almost never are informed concerning what that higher possibility is. The cause of this is, in part, the new curriculum, or what I call the new curriculum, and its desperate, essentially fickle, and utterly endless fluctuations, rooted in the silly idea that knowledge changes every year, we have no stable inherited wisdom, and every year we must start all over again. New studies, new books, new everything. In fact, there is a whole area of education that generates literatures to feed these fluctuations and ensure that, in the name of progress, they never, ever end. The phrase, "new times require new tools," expresses adequately the spirit of the new curriculum and its ever-shifting and therefore always unintelligible foundations. As an example, look at that silly but so often repeated phrase, "The world is new since 9/11. The world is new since 9/11. You've heard it 1,000 times already. Really? Just how is that the case? Is the sky now down and the ground up? Just exactly what has become, what has changed in the metaphysical structure of our reality? Nothing. But people are convinced that now, because of 9/11, we have a different world and we do not need the first principles that are embodied in the Constitution, and therefore we can take people's freedom in order to make them free. How's that for an inversion of reality? We're going to export freedom to Afghanistan by killing babies, etc. It's Complete nonsense. The world is new since 9/11. Yes.
The world isn't new, but I gotta say that with every, I've observed at least with every worldwide, more or less cataclysmic event, whether it be an earthquake, tsunami, 9/11, whatever, there are new vibes out there that people react to. And in that way, the world has changed, albeit maybe temporarily. We don't know how long, this 9/11 is going to be remembered until history may repeat itself again. You know what I'm saying?
Well, everything is connected. I mean, the bad things happen, and it affects, what does the movie call it, the force, there's a change in the force.
That's what
But good things also change. I mean, that can be changed. But the structure of reality doesn't change. To say the world is new is to make a metaphysical claim that the structure of reality has changed, and it has not. It never has, and it never will. We don't need a change in the structure of reality to awaken. The Buddha did it 2,000 years ago. Okay. We don't need some change in order to awaken. The point is that this thing is repeated so often, you have to ask yourself, why is it repeated? Of course it's repeated because people believe it. You repeat it enough and people believe it, and they say, oh my God, yes, yeah, it's coming, we gotta, the big one is coming, well, we've got to, everybody's equal, but we're gonna take out the Muslims. Or we've got to stop terrorism. Well, where are the terrorists? Well, that's the problem. Their stinkers are hiding. But that guy looks like one, so let's arrest him. So then we inch up on the loss of first principles, which are embodied amazingly in our Constitution. So that's sort of a political take on it. Okay. But this is a personification. The curriculum is created by administrators who call themselves educators, and is communicated to the student body by persons who call themselves teachers. Thus, the real cause of the problem is the empty, shallow, or skeptical worldview of the educators and teachers who fail to evoke from the traditional curriculum the depth, significance, and essential power that it possesses. Remaining ignorant and sidestepping the issue of true edification, they pass students along into the workplace with the same media-generated and egocentric values they came to school with. So understood, the whole thing is completely fraudulent. Why does this happen? The answer is simple. We no longer have any faith in our inheritance. As the philosopher and teacher Ortega has pointed out, modern man's particular problem is his illusion of total self-sufficiency. And while in this untenable posture, he is totally cut off from the fructifying power of his past. Therefore, we have at our fingertips not one, but a number of great cultures which we either totally neglect or which we treat as mere history. Today, culture either has no value at all or is valued only as fodder for the specialists, who, incidentally, we value greatly on the contradictory basis of being experts in the very things we ourselves no longer feel in need of. Really, it's just too stupid. Now, we can hardly invite our students to value and study deeply that which we ourselves do not value at all. It is not surprising, then, that our students do not hear of any human ideal higher than the vulgar economic ambition that motivates the man in the street. Truth, goodness, beauty, freedom are things he has never heard of. And because of this, our students make critical life choices out of an ignorance that educators and the new curriculum both create and perpetuate. This happens because the new curriculum is designed not to teach them, but to seduce them. And of course, in order to do this, it must affirm rather than challenge, confirm them as they are rather than negative them. Give them what they want. Give them what they want. Incidentally, the economic principle here is that the new curriculum must mirror the situation of the student it would catch. In other words, like the rest of the marketplace, it must pander to the desires of its clientele. Thus, we should not be surprised to find an identity between the motives that is behind the new curriculum and the promise it makes to our students. Really, how could they be different? Today, the motive of the market is, of course, profit, and correspondingly, the promise that the new curriculum makes to our students is not to change them, but to change their pocketbooks. In this light, it is only the naive who see anything but the bottom line in the focus on retention. It's a buzzword in the schools, retention. For example, in the state colleges and university systems. One thing is certain, despite the claims of educators, the motive behind these policies, like retention, is not love. Maybe sentimentality, but not love. But the question remains, what is the use of attracting and retaining students in an institution which in the process has made itself unable to offer those students anything essentially different from what they already have? And that is all we do. All we offer them is more. You get this degree and the statistics say your income will be higher. If you don't get it, it will be lower. More.
And is it, I'm sorry, and do you think, is it because the whole system is set up on, okay, we need dollars from the federal government, et cetera, and the way we get that is to keep our students in school?
That has further corrupted an already bad situation. It was bad when I was a boy. It's better than it is today, but it was bad. And I don't know how much federal dollars there were then. I don't think there was even a Department of Education till a few decades back.
Then it was just ignorance and, right, and you just had to do it our way, or?
In American education, we didn't have compulsory education until way up into late in the 19th century. And there was a battle in every single state which fought against compulsory education. Why? Because all of the children were working on the farm. They had work to do. They learned the trade of their fathers, their uncles, their grandfathers. And so there was a battle. And in the 1820s, the literacy rate in the worst state in the Union was higher than it is today. That was, I think, North Carolina. You wouldn't know that unless you went somewhere and looked it up and read it. Ben Franklin tells us in his biography that he was the youngest of 13 in a working class family. He couldn't remember when he didn't read and write. What school did he go to? None. It's just everybody was doing it.
Just like everybody played an instrument.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Everybody played an instrument.
The moral fiber has changed.
Well, it has to when the question of the interior life is never addressed. When I was a boy, there was a grade in the book that was called Character. That is, which is an internal reference. Today it's been changed to citizenship, which is an external reference. The interior life is abandoned. We must affirm our students, not challenge them. So, the question remains, what is the use of attracting and retaining students in these institutions? We offer them more.
More what?
Just more.
More jobs, more money, more status?
More.
Because
A
you
quantitative,
really
a reduction of quality to quantity. And as all thoughtful and unsentimental people know, the promise of more is totally empty of any educational significance and is positively harmful insofar as it tends to reconfirm and fix people in the untutored and vulgar notions they bring with them from the street. Again, how could this be morally neutral? However small their numbers are becoming, educators who take home a nice salary and who themselves have heard of true ideals and yet neglect to advise their students concerning them, or fail to inform their own teachings with them, are morally negligent. I mean by that, corrupt. What other conclusions can we draw without falling ourselves into sentimentality? It seems to me that this neglect has to be accounted for in one of two ways. Either the educator is a total skeptic with respect to the ideal human possibility, in which case he or she should, in the interest of honesty, give up the language of ideals entirely. You know, follow your dreams, children. Or the educator does not think that, generally speaking, the student body is even capable of understanding and assimilating the higher life which he or she presumes to enjoy, in which case they should confess this to their students, but do it to their faces. I have known so many teachers who thought they were representatives of human nature, who did not think ever that their students, with rare exceptions, were capable of coming up to that level. What they didn't realize was that in standing in that posture, they were a violation of every bit of culture that they were standing within. And they were ludicrous, ridiculous figures.
I think it's called a poser.
A poser.
A poser.
Well, it was a shallow and empty posture, that is for sure. I have stories to tell. A third alternative, that of just not caring one way or the other, seems hardly worthy of mention. This, I'm afraid to say, is the situation in education today. The quality of dreaming, and therefore the type of person that our system produces, is inferior. This, by the way, is nothing against our students, is it? Generally, our educational system cultivates only the two surface dreams. It either cultivates the American dream and shamefully sends the student wide-eyed and full of hopes into the mouth of an infinitely hungry military-industrial complex. Or it cultivates the private ego, encouraging the student to think that he or she is the center of the universe and that what is important is their own ambition and the petty private desires of their own petty little egos. Traditional Western culture shuddered at the idea that ambition is a virtue. In the first case, we cultivate a new breed of servants, slaves who with their lives feed the machine. In the second, we cultivate a new breed of masters, but in this case, their exalted egos are innocent of any genuinely aristocratic aspirations. Thus, it would not be correct to say that this new breed of masters are fallen or corrupted aristocrats, for the fact is that the poignant and painful side of a genuinely aristocratic obligation, you know, we say noblesse oblige, is something that very likely that they have never even heard of, noblesse oblige. And if they did hear of it, it would be, I'm afraid to say, unintelligible to them. Maybe not to children, but later it becomes unintelligible. The reason for this, that is, aside from the reasons private to their own little hearts, is that the educational system has never bothered to mention it. I am thinking here of the verses of A.E. Robinson entitled Richard Cory. I wonder if you know these. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with it, I will read it in its entirety. A.E. Robinson, modern American poet from early to the middle 20th century. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. And he was always quietly arrayed. And he was always human when he talked. But still, he fluttered pulses when he said, "Good morning." And he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything, to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light, and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. So, is Richard Cory a tragic figure? Was he a flawed character led down the garden path by a bullying fate? Was he that sort of aristocrat that is all show without substance, form with no content? Was he a weak man, beautiful on the surface but simply an empty shell? Before we decide too hurriedly that he was, we had better look very carefully at our own situation. Perhaps impatience or a tendency to judge too quickly or some other intellectual conceit is our own very fault. And Richard Cory is there to help us see it. If so, we had better deal with it here and now, so that our own fate, combined with that flaw, does not lead us, and our students following behind us, to our own irreversibly tragic ends. For in the end, what is truly tragic is not so much in literature as in the fact that we read it and love it, but do not allow it to change us. Education means change. What then is the significance of Robinson's poem for our discussion? Does he hold up before us a weak man to scorn from the safety of our superiority and our strength? Certainly not. To imagine so is a sheer conceit. After all, who among us, with respect to the issue of the embodiment of our culture, is on sufficiently safe ground to justify casting the first stone? And if there be any here who have come safely through the fires that Richard Cory knew, it is doubtful that they, any more than Jesus, would be in the business of casting stones. And certainly not at Richard Cory. It's people who cannot think with their heart who cast stones. It's people who have no mirror to look in to cast stones. Jesus talks about this all the time, self-righteousness. No, there is a poignancy and a pathos in the figure of Richard Cory that invites us to look deeper. And when we do, we will find that Richard Cory provides us with an analogy, albeit a much loftier one, with the new masters we are producing in today's educational system. Richard Cory was, to the people in the street, a very gentle, beautiful, and in fact enviable man. We wanted to be in his place. But there was in Richard Cory an inner dimension and a corresponding weight that, as the poem tells us, the others were totally unaware of. However, this inner, and therefore necessarily private, dimension is not what makes Richard Cory a sad and poignant figure, as if the possession of an inner life were somehow a species of bad luck. What makes him so sad is that he was unable to bear it. Or rather, he was unable to bear the contrast between the graceful aristocrat he appeared to others to be and felt himself that he must be, and what he knew himself to be in fact. Thus, the inner dimension is not an accident of birth. You can't be born with an inner life and somebody else isn't. That's silly. That's a metaphysical impossibility. Thus, the inner dimension is not an accident of birth, is not constituted in the fact that someone is born into an aristocratic line. Far from it. The inner dimension of Richard Cory lies in the deeper fact of his relationship to that accident. In a word, he took his social position and its inherent tensions and responsibilities with a life-defining seriousness. This means that he was, in fact, a genuine aristocrat. The fact that he did not succeed, however, is something that is left best between him and that which attended him on his own inner ground, in which we have different names for. The inner self, spirit, God, whatever you want to call it. Leave that to him. Our task is to stand by compassionately and learn from his mistake, remembering in fear and trembling that perhaps we ourselves have as yet not even been tested in the way he was. And don't imagine that Richard Cory is just an invention of the poet's mind, as if there aren't people exactly like this. There are. Each of us, metaphysically constituted with an inner life, or at least the possibility of an inner life, insofar as we come into contact with that, becomes self-ruling. Insofar, each of us becomes the ruler of ourself. Each of us has as the single symbol of that, the king. And if the king is not an aristocrat, I don't know what is. There's no way to escape this. Once that inner life is constituted, I am responsible. I have no one outside who is responsible for me, and that defines the king. We can't get out of this. Richard Cory is an image of that. A sad one, but don't imagine that it's something imaginary. Oh, you know, the poet just was an exercise in his imagination. Richard Cory then carried inwardly a life-defining weight. However, those in the street who thought him more fortunate than they were totally unaware of the relative ease that their ignorance and their poverty afforded them. Alarmstufen. They are totally ignorant, at least until Cory's death, of the inner dimension and significance of the aristocratic ideal, and therefore they have absolutely no conception of the immense psychic burden that this gentle man carried. Thus, they have no insight or knowledge of the inner significance of the culture they inherit, but neither inhabit nor embody. This culture is all around us. It's there, it judges us. In the poem, Rilke's poem on the statue of Apollo, he goes down the poem and he describes the way the light flashes off of the statue in every part and every place. He even goes to the loins, and then he concludes the sonnet, "You must change your life." That is all around us. That is the purpose of culture. Culture means growth. From the ground up. Not from the Buddha's ground, from mine. So, they have no insight or knowledge of the inner significance of the culture they inherit, but neither inhabit nor embody. In a word, they are ignorant. Ignorant, that is, until they read or hear the poem.
Hear the
Poem. Or see the statue. Or read the Gospels. Not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but the words of Jesus. They're not the same thing. Just go through the book and you'll see there are multiple voices. And there's one voice of the Master. It's always consistent. And since I've told you, now it's your responsibility to go out and pick those passages out and just throw all the rest of the stuff out. It'll just confuse you. Every narrator, the people who put those Gospels together, every one of them had an agenda. You have to find the voice of the Master within that agenda. You know, to have Jesus come out and say to Peter, when he's trying to manipulate him, say, "You are a devil, Peter. Get thee hence." And then you have, over here in the Gospel of Matthew, you have Jesus sending all of these disciples out to save the world on a commission. That never happened. Why would he send a bozo out to teach the world and convince his own student that he had arrived at something that he hadn't arrived at? Over here he calls him a devil because he was. Why would he send someone like that out to confuse the people? It never happened. There's another story about Peter that did happen. It's a story about when he woke up at the end. Well, his conversion is called. I was going to say he was awakened, but he was converted. And that's when Jesus told him, he said, before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times. Never, master, 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 never, never, never. You know, Peter's full of this words. And then, you know, sure enough, when he hears the cock crow, it's just after he is denying him the 3rd time. And it says, all it says, Peter wept. It doesn't say he was a transformed human being and at one with God. All it tells you is that he realized for a moment what a damn fool he was. And that all of what he'd done before was nothing. He'd missed the point. So, it's there that he hadn't changed. Why would Jesus send him out with an exalted idea of himself that he could go and teach the world? It never happened. So you just have to go and throw all that stuff out. Find the teacher. So I'm going to move ahead here a little bit. This brings us back to those students and the quality of dreaming that modern education cultivates
But
within.
however, I've got to interject there before you go on. The Catholic Church wouldn't have been able to be set up if we'd done it some other way.
Well, it's clear that they hooked a lot of people with a false mythology, or mythology that was true but was taught as history. But then if your interests are corporate, which means physical, and more converts are better than fewer, and you have reduced the qualitative to the quantitative, then of course everything is going to be
I was
turned.
thinking more along the lines of on this rock I build my church, as opposed to Peter's church, the Roman Catholic.
Yes, I understand what you were saying, yes. But then, so you have to ask yourself what Jesus would have said.
No, I agree.
I mean, because the teaching is there, it's already there. You know, what does it profit you if you gain the whole Catholic Church and lose your soul? Of course, they turned it to that because that's what their purposes were, corporate purposes. So that's what we meant. Okay, well, yeah, we're on the same page. This brings us back to those students and the quality of dreaming that modern education cultivates within them. The situation, unfortunately, is this. The new breed of masters that education generates are ignorant in exactly the same way as Robinson's people on the pavement, with the ironic exception that they are now in the position, socially, of Richard Cory. They have the position, but none of the restraint that characterizes truly cultivated people. In the Book of Changes says, inferior people work through power. The superior man does not act thus. They have the position, but none of the restraint that characterizes truly cultivated people. I am reminded here of a news item about a party which was attended a few years back by a number of very highly placed individuals. You'll like this story. The party was given to celebrate the 80th birthday of comedian Joey Adams. This in itself is interesting, and was given at the Helmsley Hotel in New York City. Leona Helmsley was, of course, there, along with Bess Meyerson and Imelda Marcos. All 3 were under indictment. This, of course, was not so strange. I mean, that 3 people under indictment should be together. What was strange was that New York Attorney General Robert Abrams, who was investigating Helmsley, was also there. So was federal judge Robert Minter, who was hearing her appeal. I wonder what you think of this. Is this the cultivated restraint of Richard Cory? Or a vulgar example of having our poor, underprivileged noses rubbed in it? These people, these vulgar people, are our new masters, and they are the products of some of our finest schools. They have the position that formerly pointed to and demanded a certain cultivation of the inner dimension, and yet one suspects that they have never even heard of it. Therefore, they are unable to serve anything but themselves, and any sense of deeper filial and fraternal responsibility is totally unintelligible to them. They understand can, but they know nothing of must. Thus, their desire life and its master ego have for them a very nearly absolute value. Therefore, and with our help, meaning the teachers, they become not human beings, but great gargantuan bellies, sheer consumers. They live, as Socrates said, to eat. These are the new masters we produce. They are the masters of the aforementioned machine, and unfortunately, what they eat with astonishing efficiency are the others. But let us be more clear concerning who these others are and how they relate to our new masters. This is an important thing. The principle that will help us understand is this: there can be no masters without slaves. We have known this, Bergyaev tells us, since Plato. These others are those who have been given and believe the dream that corresponds to slaves. I have called this dream the American dream. The irony is that the two dreams are not really qualitatively different, though the belief that they are is an essential element in the motivation of each. The slave has to believe that he's different than the master to settle for it. And the master has to believe that he's different from the slave. And therefore he does his role. Both are consumers and both want the same thing, more. The only essential difference is in their numbers. They relate to each other, whether they know it or not, as defining boundaries. The one defines the other defines the one. Thus, like man and woman, they are fundamentally identical. One, in this case corrupted, human nature. As for the numbers, everybody understands these. The slaves are many, and the masters few. As for the boundary between the two, the educational system teaches it, their egos recognize and acknowledge it, and the machine enforces it. This is how it must be and always is when life is reduced to measurable and therefore quantitative values. But quantitative values are by definition relative values, like freedom. Relative values, and therefore when life is lived according to them, absolute values, like freedom is an absolute value, become unintelligible. Absolute values become unintelligible. This is a psychological and an epistemological fact. You have to think about this. There are certain words that are absolutes. It's nonsense to say, well, just a little bit, almost free, a little bit free. Either you're free or you're not. And we have confused political liberty with freedom. They're two different things. Freedom is a spiritual term. Liberty is a political term. We use them interchangeably and confuse everybody. If I'm a slave, I am not free. If I'm a little bit of a slave, I am not free.
Well, I was looking at the education system trying to figure out who would not be a slave, because they're all slaves.
Of course. With the rare exception. They're there, but they're extremely hard to find.
I'm talking about everybody, the teachers, they're all slaves.
In general, yes. But you're not saying that there's not a possibility for an exception. I've known them. I've tried to be one. As I told you, I had to fight for my own survival.
Well, yeah, but it's still a slave because you're working within something that is contrary to what you believe.
No. I'm not confirmed. I'm not saying that we have a system is itself corrupt. I'm saying they don't follow it.
Oh.
I follow it. Freedom is not license. I follow the structure. Education is about change, and so therefore that's what we do in my classes. I don't bend to that other thing. No. It's the thing itself, as a general structure, is normative. For example, giving grades. There's a reason for grades. You can develop a system that does it another way, but there is a reason for grades. You take the class and you've done this well, and that's your grade. You didn't do this well. You accomplished this much. And your grade reflects that.
Okay.
You know.
If your students were getting good grades, more so than other classes, it's because you're making it interesting and fun and getting them where, right? You're trying to meet them where they're at. And
There's a certain natural joy in the philosophical life, yes. Sure. And,
I mean, I hated history all the way through grade school, but when I got in college, there's this big, huge room, and I swear that guy fought in the Civil War. And he had me wanting to pay taxes. Thank God it didn't last long, but, you know, but he was so much fun. It was, I got an A in that class, and I didn't try. It was just an easy, fun class. He made you want to be there.
well,
And so it is a fun teacher.
maybe he was doing what he should be doing, and, you know, I hope he was. I have known teachers like that. But to be a part of a system that has become corrupted does not make one corrupt. It is conceding to the corruption that makes one corrupt.
Okay, so what you're saying is in your position, you always stood up to it.
I never succumbed to it. It cost me, but it cost me money too. The
What you're
American
saying
thing
is you
there,
recognize it would cost you more to succumb to it.
I missed the first part of that.
What you're saying is that you recognize it would cost you more to succumb to it.
Yeah, I wasn't unfamiliar with the teachings of the master, and I knew that what did it profit me to lose the whole thing. Listen, this is not just something you read in the Bible. This can become a real test. I can tell you the day when it happened, where I was standing, what I was thinking. Because we have nothing if we don't have doubts. If you're saying you never doubted, I'm sorry, that's probably false. You probably don't know yourself. I had nothing but doubt. That's all I had. Fear.
When what? I'm sorry, I missed something. You had nothing but doubt when?
Through most of my education. There's every reason to doubt yourself, because first of all, you have geniuses all around you, starting with the professors, and some of your classmates are just, they shine. But you recognize that they shine and they do really, really well, but then you talk to them and you find out that they're total cynics. They have no functional heart. You're in a crisis. What do you do? I mean, you've always admired them. You know, read Castaneda's last book, The Active Side of Infinity. If you haven't read it, you have to read it. At this point, he does his whole recapitulation, and he tells you of what happened with him and some of his teachers. I mean, university teachers. Things happened to him that just were totally earth-shaking. And he had to come out of that totally rethinking what was going on. I mean, his teachers were complete asses. So what do you do with that? Well, it's an either or. You either continue on confused or you say, no, the whole thing is wrong. And make a leap. In my case, Heraclitus says that many are bad and a few are good. And
However, you have your own personal experience as with everybody else. Every one of those teachers had a different experience, and we have a different perspective. And obviously, it hit you, and it was very important that you stay in line with your truths, just like any of the rest of them. But they may not have all received it the same way.
well, of course they didn't receive it because they weren't open to it.
Yeah.
The Spirit is there. If you are open to guidance, it will bring you to a hard place. And then you have to decide. The Old Testament has it like this, that the house of sorrow is greater than the house of joy. Spirit will guide you.
Absolutely, but we can't expect other people to be where we're at.
Who said that we should accept that in principle? If this is the way that leads to human life, then we have to talk about the fact that people have been brought there and have done nothing, have refused to make these choices, and choose a path that is dangerous for those around them. False and dangerous. If you're sneaking up on this as being a species of being judgmental, this is incorrect. You have to see the way things really are. And see it for what it is, and move away from it.
You should have been a preacher.
It is the negative way. Netty, netty. Not this, not that. If you're full of yourself, and if you think because you went through school and you got all A's, that you are the measure of ideal human nature, you're just a damn fool and you're dangerous. And there are lots of them out there. And the idea that, well, you know, they're in a different position or situation is really unfounded.
Many of them become teachers.
Well, I'm talking about teachers. You know, they think that they are the measure. They don't know how preposterously vulgar they are and how dangerous they are. But it's the same in the field of psychology, where I worked for years. Most of the therapists are dangerous people. Dangerous in the aggressive way or dangerous in the sentimental way. Both are dangerous.
Are we all just babes in the wood trying to get by and figure it out? And, you know, I mean, yeah, they're teachers and they're educated and they should know a hell of a lot more than their students, but often they don't.
Well, my position, as I repeated several times this evening, is this is not morally neutral. That's all I have to say about that. This is dangerous. So, the American dream, therefore, is not the true dream of freedom, but a minimally tangible substitute for the real thing. Tangible, maybe. The American dream, then, is the dream of freedom from want. And that is, of course, readily achievable because what it wants is really very little. It wants a full belly. It is satisfied with having less than the so-called masters, provided that it does not require to feel hunger and is allowed to preserve the illusion that political liberty and a full belly are freedom. Images are seen everywhere in magazines and television where, for example, beer, which people can afford, is sold with leisure that they cannot afford. This satisfaction with a diminished dream is, of course, based on an image of themselves and therefore of human nature that is itself debased. Man as a consumer, little Pac-Man, eat, 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 eat. But where does this diminished image of the self have its roots? The answer is complex and has dimensions which we won't go into here, but its relationship to education is fairly simple. It seems to me that we either teach the inferior image or fail to offer in its place anything higher. Mencius, the Confucian thinker, says, those who cultivate the inferior parts of their nature are inferior men. Those who cultivate the superior parts of their nature are superior men. Superior, not inferior. So there you have it right now. You've heard it. I quoted it from Mencius. If, indeed, what we're doing here this evening is cultivating the superior parts of ourselves because we're seeking to find out what is true and what is false about one dimension of our experience, education, it follows from what Mencius says that we are now situated here superior persons. The problem then is to get out the door and keep it. That's a crisis.
Once we're given the law, we are in crisis.
Yes, Kierkegaard says man, spiritually understood, is always in crisis.
Say that again, please.
Man, spiritually understood, is always in crisis. The word crisis and cross are the same word, the cognate words. Cross is crisis. Crossroads. Remember that's where Dorothy meets the wizard, not the wizard, but the scarecrow. He's hung up on the cross at the crossroads. Really, really interesting.